Hello, my name is Robert Stevens and I am here today at the Cowpens National Battlefield to do a presentation on the events that took place here on January 17th, 1781. Now, it was here that forces under the command of Colonel Tarleton, who was being commanded by General Cornwallis, and forces under command of General Morgan met. Now, Tarleton had the advantage, and the terrain was better suited to the battle tactics of the British regulars than it was the more guerrilla-style warfare tactics of the colonial forces. Now, I will be proceeding down the battlefield trail on the battlefield today, and I will be showing you different points. I will be using various maps and other examples to show you what was going on and how things happened. Now, this battle occurred where it occurred due to necessity rather than ideal terrain or an ideal defensive position. This terrain was really better suited to British regulars than it was to colonial militia and Continental Army. Now, one of the problems was that Morgan was concerned that if he tried to cross the Broad River, that he would be overrun and destroyed in detail by the British forces. So he chose the best defensive position he could before the river crossing in an attempt to defeat the British forces that were in pursuit of him. Now, as I said earlier, these were Tarleton's forces with approximately 1,100 men, a mix of infantry and cavalry. Now, Morgan chose a small hill to center his defense on, and it wasn't the ideal defensive position, but it was the best that he had available. In the river crossing. Now, due to the proximity here to the river, he chose this place to defend and to go ahead and bring the battle to fruition in an attempt to defeat Tarleton's forces before they would be able to destroy him at a river crossing. Now, the terrain here is really ideal for continental warfare tactics, meaning the straight line tactics of the British regulars. This is what they trained for. This was their ideal battlefield. It was open terrain, flat terrain. It was not favorable to the continental forces, the Patriot forces. They were more used to a more guerrilla type of warfare, and they were not as well trained or as good at the continental style warfare as the British were. Now, this is a side effect of training and a side effect of how they did things. Now, Morgan was a tactical genius in this battle because when he placed his forces in their defensive positions, he placed his Continentals at the hill, he placed the militia troops ahead, and he had them fire a couple of volleys, fall back, and he utilized a reputation, rightly or wrongly, that was held by many of the British that militias would break. And these British forces saw what they wanted to see. And they went ahead and they pushed forward and they pushed forward. They pressed the victory. And if the militia had been breaking, it would have probably worked. However, they were falling back. And they fell back through their own lines, reformed, and came back out in an attack. Now, as you can see behind me, the battlefield, while it has a slight slope, it's not anything that most people would call significant terrain. Now, Tarleton ran into some problems, and one of those problems was South Carolina terrain. Now, if you've ever been to South Carolina, you know that there's a little bit of water. It can get a little swampy, things like that, and Tarleton ran into some problems with that. Now, I am standing pretty much right in the middle of the battlefield. Over to my left would be where Tarleton's forces were coming from, and he had essentially what would be called today a combined arms force. He had a mix of infantry, he had some cavalry, and he had a little bit of artillery. And over to my right is where Morgan's forces would be. Now, as you can tell, this is not what I would consider serious terrain, not what most people would consider serious terrain. But Morgan had to pick the best defensive option he had available, and this is what he had. Morgan and his troops managed to pull off what is called a double envelopment maneuver here. And what that means is he had his militia fall back, and they fell back through the lines that were being held by the Continental forces. And these regular Continental troops held the line, and the militia reorganized, and the cavalry came around from one side, the militia came around from the other. Tarleton's forces were pushing their attack. They saw weakness, they saw a chance to win, and they were doing what they were trained to do. They were attacking, they were doing what they needed to do, what should have worked in most cases. However, Morgan's plan figured for this, and as a consequence, the British lost a battle that they should not have lost. This is a battle that was in the British wheelhouse. This is their specialty. Flat land, this sort of battle is not a battle that should have been lost by British forces, and the Continentals should have lost. However, Morgan's tactical genius and planning allowed him to turn a subpar defensive position into a victory. Behind me is the Washington Light Infantry Monument. This monument was erected in 1856 and is the earliest monument to the Battle of Cowpens. Now, this battle, along with Kings Mountain, these were the two major victories in the Southern campaign that really, they turned the tide for the colonial forces and for the rebellion in the South. If it hadn't been for this battle, then Morgan's forces, if they had been defeated and destroyed, this would have significantly affected the outcome of the war. And you can actually directly trace the consequences of this battle all the way to the surrender of Cornwallis. And you cannot understate the importance of this battle to American history. For without this battle, it is very possible that the revolution would have been lost. And if the revolution had been lost, we would not be here.